Hey guys, welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I am the host. We are recording this early on Saturday morning. Kind of feels like that one time when Tyler, Jason, and I recorded on Saturday morning. But we're going to push through talking about some undrafted free agents, highlighting, we each chose three. We'll briefly talk about the long snapper. But each of us chose three undrafted free agents that we wanted to highlight and talk about maybe their chances of making the roster. So, and then we've also got a couple interviews with Chris Harry, the Chargers team reporter, and then Trey Wallace, who covers the Tennessee Volunteers for Rocky Top Insider, talking about Josh Palmer. So some great information from both of those guys. But first and foremost, Tyler and Alex are joining me. Alex, how you doing today, man?
Good. Speaking of Josh Palmer, I've decided if he drops the ball this season, it's because he's Canadian. And I think that we just have to start making that distinction.
Fair enough. Tyler, how you doing, man?
Yeah, but he is going to have plus 10 speed in snow games. So I really think he's going to it'll balance itself out. As far as Chargers Twitter goes, before we jumped on, everything seemed to be a conflict. By the time we log off today, maybe the world has ended on Chargers Twitter. We'll find out in about 45 minutes.
If anyone needs, a good little therapy session, technically I can run some therapy sessions because I'm a school counselor. Tyler is the son of a therapist. So basically between the two of us, we've got you guys covered if you ever need it. But yeah, so we're going to get to this interview with Trey Wallace, about Josh Palmer first and foremost. Some great information about the Canadian, the former goalkeeper. So give that a listen. If you're watching on YouTube, again, that's going to be a separate video. Otherwise, the audio version is going to be right now. All right, so some great information about Josh Palmer, someone that I think I'm very excited about. We're all pretty excited, after kind of watching and diving the film. But, a great person, it seems like, off the field as well. So definitely fits the Chargers culture and what they're trying to build. And I think Trey Wallace did a fantastic job outlining that. So let's get to some of these UDFAs. As I said, each of us chose three that we are going to highlight. So Tyler, why don't you start us off? Which three players you got to look at, and then kind of diving into maybe their chances of making the roster.
All right, I will start with linebacker Amen Ogbongbemiga from Oklahoma State. I'm fairly certain I nailed that. Thank you very much. He was born in Nigeria and moved to the U.S. in the early 2000s. He played football, ran track and field, and was recruited to Oklahoma State by his cousin Emmanuel Ogba, who plays for the Dolphins. I think that's how you say both their names. He did play outside linebacker in high school, but he did switch to inside linebacker at Oklahoma State, and he should stay there at the next level. As far as the stats go, he is top 20 against the run. In both run stops and missed tackle rate. So against the run, excelling typically at just attacking a gap or taking good angles to the ball carrier towards the sideline. He's I don't want to say he's a poor man's Nick Bolton, but he's kind of like that. But he's a solid tackler and looks to drive through the ball carrier, not just make impact. Of course, he also has 500 special team snaps in his career, and that's a plus for these guys. The bad, unfortunately, is while he is top 20 against the run, he has some metrics where he's bottom 20 against the pass. So giving up a high completion percentage and NFL passer rating. And then both against the games I watched against Texas and Oklahoma, he can get caught, biting on play action or being late to read a passing play, or even just being late to reading a running back or getting to a running back on a swing route out of the backfield. He could have a role in obvious situations, run situations, and of course in special teams, but he really shouldn't be on the field right now when it comes to passing downs.
Yeah, when I saw that he was voted as their special teams player of the year as a sophomore, I was like, okay, that makes sense why he's being targeted by the Chargers. Alex, we'll move on to your next guy here. Which player do you want to start with?
Yeah, I'll start with Eli Stove, the Auburn receiver who, got the interest of the Chargers and is on the team. As far as his chances of making the team, it's a competitive receiver room, right? We've talked about a guy who was drafted last year and KJ Hill potentially being cut. The future of Joe Reed is kind of in the air. You really have 5 slots that are sort of filled in with Keenan, Mike, Josh Palmer, Tyron Johnson, and Jalen Guyton. And then there's this 6th spot that's sort of open. But Stove was a weird one for me because I've seen him play before. He was obviously at Auburn behind Anthony Schwartz and Seth Williams, who were both drafted. So you kind of had this logjam to deal with in terms of the depth chart. And obviously his quarterback is Bo Nix, who, has not panned out to what Auburn wanted him to be, the sequel to Cam Newton. None of that happened. So yeah, I think that hurt him a little bit. But the guy that he reminds me of so much is Joe Reed. I mean, he has about 1,200 receiving yards. He has about 600 rushing yards. I think he missed 2018 due to an injury, but that's the dude. He also does play special teams. So it is kind of a very Joe Reed type signing, and I imagine that's kind of what he's going to be trying to do in his quest to make the team. One thing that stood out to me was Michael Peterson posted on Twitter all the RAS scores of the undrafted free agents, and he had like a 2.8. I was like, I watch him on tape, and I'm like, this guy's not a 2.8. So what happened here?
Yeah.
But I looked, and he had an interview with the Draft Network, and apparently he had an Abductor Strain as he was doing all of his drills. So, instead of running a 4.4, he runs a 4.54, right? And, if you have that thigh injury, it's just impossible to do cone drills and all that. So, that may be not a great decision on his part to run it if he was injured, but, he probably didn't have much of a choice, because then teams would have been like, well, why didn't you run the drills? They were very easy. So I think that was the thing with him. But honestly, like I came away from his film pretty impressed. I again don't know what his chances of making the team are, because it's just so competitive in the receiver room, as Brandon Staley and wants it to be. So I think he has a chance. If you really just break it down to it's him, Joe Reed, who are kind of very similar players, KJ Hill, and Jason Moore. Like those are the four guys that are going to be competing for that last spot. I give him, maybe like a 15-20% chance in that group for sure. Definitely has some athleticism, much better than his RAS score. But I think the fact that he can contribute on special teams and do some of those Joe Reed type things while also being a slightly better route runner, that definitely gives him a little bit of an advantage.
Yeah, to me, that's like the most interesting one. When I saw that, when I was like, okay, like I wonder, what the plan is here, because he is very similar to Joe Reed, and they drafted Joe Reed in the 5th round. So that one definitely is going to be one to keep an eye on. So I'm going to start with Hunter Moyer, the tight end from Oregon, obviously former teammate of Justin Herbert. And he's got an interesting profile. He went to Oregon as a defensive end. He was second team All-State in California and had a decent, evaluation as a defensive end. And then, he redshirted his freshman season and actually made the switch to tight end, where he was, mostly on the practice squad. And that's where he spent most of his career. He's definitely not much of a threat in terms of receiving ability. He's definitely a blocking tight end. But he does his role well. I think, in Oregon does a lot of, outside zone stuff where they've got to have a tight end who can set the edge, or who can set, not get beat by defensive ends on the backside of the play. So very similar to what the tight ends of the Chargers are going to be doing. I kind of wonder if they're bringing him in to be a challenger for Gabe Neighbors at fullback, though, because he does have a similar profile to Neighbors. I know people are going to say, well, you just hate Gabe Neighbors. And it's like, well,
yes.
Listen, man, like Camp Moyer, I think does have a very similar profile to Neighbors in that, he's a little athletic fullback, H-back kind of work. And they did use him as a lead blocker quite a bit at Oregon. And so if he's a tight end, like he's not making the roster, right? Because you have Jared Cook, you have Donald Parham, and now Trey McKitty. Those three are locks. Steven Anderson, unfortunately for him, kind of is going to be the odd man out there. They have Matt Sokol or Sokol, or however you say it. No one knows about him yet at this point. He's been on the practice squad for the last 2 years. So as a tight end, I have a hard time seeing the vision where he makes the team. As a fullback, if he makes that switch, or if the Chargers make that switch for him, all he has to do really is prove that he's a better special teams player than Gabe Neighbors, because I think the blocking ability, the receiving ability is pretty much about the same. And, if there's one like valid criticism that we can make of Gabe Neighbors, is that he was pretty bad on special teams, which unfortunately was the theme for the entire team last year. So if there's a free agent of mine, like of the three that I'm taking, I probably would say that Camp Moyer would have the best chance of making a team if he's a fullback. If he's a tight end, I don't think he has much of a chance of making the roster at all.
What did they consider? They considered Gabe Neighbors a fullback last year, right? stupid question,
Think
but like,
so.
or did they consider him a tight end or an H back? I don't know.
No,
what they
he
consider him.
entered he entered camp as a fullback and was listed as a fullback, but he was technically a tight end at Florida State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So they were similarly productive in like I guess in like college, maybe not production wise because I know the seasons are different, but like they looked like they're kind of same because like Neighbors did have that calling card over Holly where he was like kind of a productive tight end. So is that kind of similar for him and the guy whose name I can't pronounce right now?
Camp Moyer wasn't
Moyer.
super productive as a pass catcher until this year. This year he had a few touchdowns. He had like 160 yards, I think. So those were all career highs. He had 3 touchdowns. And they only played, I think, 4 games. Oregon did 5 games.
Okay.
So he was decently productive this year. It wasn't until this year. We were talking, beforehand, Jacob Breland was kind of the receiving tight end before. So that didn't leave a whole lot of opportunities for anyone else. But as a blocker, I really like what I see. He roots out defensive linemen pretty well, and he's able to serve as an effective lead blocker. So we'll see. Like I said, if he's a tight end, I can't envision a world where he is even on the practice squad, because I assume that they would want to keep Steven Anderson on the practice squad. But if he's a fullback, I think he has a better chance.
Okay, I like it. All right, I'll move on to my next guy. That's defensive tackle Jared Goldwyer from Louisville. He's a 6'6", 305 nose tackle who collected 30 pressures and 31 run stops the past 2 years. I think easily his best attribute is his quick first step to beat the interior offensive lineman and either pressure the quarterback or disrupt the run play. But unfortunately, I kind of think that's it. Like he doesn't have much of an anchor. And sometimes when he's trying to either rush the passer or reset the line of scrimmage, everything comes from his upper body and not much drive from his legs, it feels like. And he needs to engage both of those to be disrupted, because being kind of like an upper body shover guy at 6'6" means you could lose leverage, and he really does. Someone, and by someone I mean a random article I found, compared him to Linval Joseph, and I guess like some of that does appear. Like I know Linval Joseph is really big, and Goldwyer does hustle from sideline to sideline, kind of like Joseph does, but Joseph's a much more complete player with more athletic traits. So I'm not saying like they're even really close. That's just a comp someone made, and I guess based on size and maybe that's some of that sideline to sideline. I guess I just don't see where he would fit on this roster. Like I don't know if I'm taking him over Fehoko.
Yeah.
And there's a guy who has like not much of an anchor, who's maybe if he can put it all together and work with his legs, that's fine, I suppose. But to me, he's just kind of like does his job with his arms, and there's kind of it after that. So, and if he doesn't get that first step and win, he has no pass rush moves to do anything else after that. So, I mean, again, I don't know how much nose tackles have pass rush moves. I don't know how much to expect out of them, but like I would have rather just had Shelvin, obviously.
Speaking of defensive tackles who won't make the team, my next guy is Forrest Merrill. And so Forrest Marrow kind of blew up on Twitter a little bit because I think there was like an old film breakdown from February, and like he is a mauler in the run game in Arkansas State, and that's like his most positive attribute. That dude can just he can flat out stop the run. But, and I don't mean to say this is a bad thing, it's kind of the only thing he can do. And so like Staley has kind of talked a lot about versatility, and like you have Justin Jones who can pass rush to an extent. You do have Linval Joseph who didn't get a sack last year, but he did have 20 pressures. Jerry Tillery, obviously. And so the other challenge for him, other than not being much of a pass rusher, is that his arms are kind of like really short and his hands are also very small. And so
he's only like 6 feet tall, isn't he?
Right. Yeah. He's like barely 6 feet tall. Like I think on his RAS, it was like 6,006. So like he's barely in the 6 foot club, but just enough to avoid being a manlet. But so I would say that, he does have 17.5 tackles for loss, about 8.5 sacks through his career. But again, like going from Arkansas State to playing now at an NFL level, where you're going to, if you are a defensive tackle on this team, like we saw Fehoko have to play snaps last year, even though he was on the practice squad, he came up for that Bills game. So like, I just think it's really challenging. Like his motor and energy is all there, like when you watch the tape, but the problem is like, man, if this dude had the body of Tyler Shelvin, like if you give him, he's 6'3" and you give him, he's 350 pounds, like he might have very well been a 3rd, 4th round pick, and well, realistically, he probably wouldn't have been playing at Arkansas State. He probably would have been playing at LSU or Alabama. But, so like the energy, the effort is there, but just his physical tool set and sort of his one dimensionality, like that's going to be a problem for him, I think, in his effort to make the team when you're comparing him to guys that, are just sort of better.
Yeah, he's definitely strong at the point of attack and definitely anchors down well. But, those physical limitations, they'll catch up to him eventually. So, you'll have to see about that one. The next one I want to talk about here is Darius Harper. Shocker. I took all three blockers. Sue me. Darius Harper is the offensive tackle out of Cincinnati. Very intriguing athlete. He actually transferred from Miami, Ohio to Cincinnati, and he was a basketball player at Miami, Ohio. So undrafted free agent, basketball player, anyone? Just kidding.
Oh, he's going to be Gabe Neighbors? No,
but he's got really great size. He's listed at 6'7". He measured in, pretty close to there at his pro day, 308 pounds. So he's a little on the other undersized side of things. But he's got a very intriguing physical profile, very similar to what Trey Pipkins was. Difference is Trey Pipkins was drafted in the 3rd round, and this guy's an undrafted free agent. But he ran a 5.05 40-yard dash, and he jumped 30 inches at his pro day, which, if you're over 300 pounds and can jump 30 inches in the vertical jump, like that's damn impressive. As an offensive tackle on the field, he's definitely got a lot of work to do, which is obviously why he wasn't drafted. His technique in general is not really there, and he's still kind of unfamiliar with the concept of like anchoring down against the bull rush. So he's not the strongest guy. He's definitely got to fill out his frame. But, you watch him do some great things at the second level and show off his athleticism as a puller, as a reach blocker, and you can see some stints of NFL offensive line play. It's just like I said, he's only played the position for 2 years. And, he only started really a full season this past year, started a handful of games in 2019. But, when you're watching the All-22, you look at James Hudson, who isn't polished by any means, and then you look at his teammate on the other side, and you can definitely see a clear difference of why Hudson was drafted and why Harper wasn't. But I think if you can keep him on the practice squad, work him in on some training camp reps and things like that, get him a couple preseason games, and maybe you have something there like down the road, like in 2022 or 2023. But talking about a crowded room with the Chargers offensive tackle group, you obviously have Rashawn Slater, you have Brian Bulaga, you have Trey Pipkins, you have Storm Norton, and I think those are the 4 that are going to make it. You could have Tyree St. Louis if he's a tackle, maybe make it over Norton, but I think they would carry 4 on the roster, and then obviously 3 on game day. So I have a hard time envisioning him making the roster. But as a practice squad, long-term developmental project, I'm intrigued enough to the point where I understand why they targeted him as an undrafted free agent.
So Cincinnati really had a former defensive tackle and a former basketball player as their 2 tackles. That's
they sure
awful.
did.
They sure did.
But they were really freaking good. I mean, they went undefeated and played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And if Hudson didn't get ejected from targeting, they could have won that game, I think. But it was very interesting watching, someone who clearly, a defensive tackle at heart and a former basketball player who's only played offensive line for 2 years be their tackles. It was definitely an interesting watch.
Yeah, I'll still fight to the death for Cincinnati. They should have made the college football playoff this year. And even though, they probably would have gotten blown out by Alabama, I think they should have had the right to be blown out by Alabama.
Well, what's wild now is that they're potentially going to 12 teams. They're going to go from 4 playoff teams to 12. And I'm like, you guys.
Whoa, really?
Really?
Yeah, there's a big push amongst boosters to get more teams in the playoff. And a lot of people think that they're going to go all the way up to 12 teams. But that's a college football topic for another day.
Maybe start with like 8 first. I don't know.
I know.
But that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, the guy that I want to talk about as my last undrafted free agent and the guy who I ultimately think will make this team is Alex Kessman. He's the kicker from Pittsburgh. And, you just watch this dude and you look at the stats. He's got a leg. He actually has the longest field goal recorded in Heinz Field history. There is not a Steelers kicker who has kicked above 58 yards. The record for longest field goal at Heinz Field is shared by Mason Crosby and Matt Gay at the NFL, 55 yards. 58 was booted by Alex Kessman. So he's got a strong leg. He actually has the highest field goal percentage in NCAA history from 50 yards. He hit 12 of 18 this year. Like, this dude, to me, is kind of almost like a shoo-in to make the team, because the issue with Badgley is, his ceiling has kind of been reached. Like, he's never going to become a consistent 50-yard field goal kicker, in my opinion.
Right.
And so when you look at Kessman, somebody who, I was talking about Heinz Field, that is one of the hardest places in the NFL to kick, because the wind blows in from one side, and also the sod on that field is terrible. But, so like, to me, you look at those numbers overall in college, he wasn't like amazing. He was, I think, 75% for his career total, but that number actually jumped to 80% in 2020. So he definitely has shown some signs of improvement. You already know he can kick from deep. And so to me, like, kicking is such a kind of binary thing. Like, you can either kick, or you're going to be the best kicker in the group, or you're not. I haven't researched too much into Vizcaino. So that's kind of like the aspect of this that we don't know. But, to me, I haven't seen anything special from him that really would give him an edge in this competition. And again, Badgley's issue is not so much that he's like a terrible kicker or anything, but it's, you need to be able to nail 45 to 55 yards in the NFL. And we've seen, this Chargers offense, or, really decision making as a whole, limited by the fact that, like, hey, we can't trust our kicker, right? And that was one of the things that, while we all blame Anthony Lynn a lot for last year, it's one of the things I sympathized with him with, because it was just like, there's just not a lot you can do about that when it came to Michael Badgley or having another kicker. Realistically, if we look back in hindsight, like, they probably should have had a kicking competition last year, but they didn't, right? So, but yeah, so to me, Kessman is the dude. You look at his career numbers, you look at his leg. To me, out of all the guys that I looked into, like, he's the biggest threat to make this team. And I would go as far as to say, I don't know how he'll do in the preseason. And, that's another whole thing of, like, we're not going to be able to see who's kicking best in camp. We're only going to be able to see those preseason games. But to me, like, I just have a hard time believing, going from Heinz Field to basically a dome stadium in SoFi. Yeah. I mean, it is a little bit open on the outside, but practically speaking, it's a dome. I just don't think he'll get worse. Like, I think his numbers will get better. So to me, he's the guy that, out of the three guys that I looked into, and honestly, out of this whole class, I think he has the most promise.
Yeah, I definitely agree that he's the most likely to make the roster, right? Because Michael Badgley, I feel like bringing him back on the roster was just kind of like an insurance policy. Like, if we're not able to find someone who can upgrade what we want, then at least we know what we have in Badgley. And so I completely agree. The way that Anthony Lynn handled him is one of the things where I was like, there's not really much more he can do at this point. So I totally agree. Kessman, I think it is if you put a list of like the odds, I think Kessman would have the best odds to make the roster. I've seen some people say, like, well, he's not super accurate in the short term. He missed an extra point or two too many. And so the thing that I'll say about kickers and how they translate, like, the Buccaneers drafted two of the best college kickers in recent memory, and both of them flamed out super quickly in Tampa Bay. Obviously, Matt Gay has kind of revived his career in Los Angeles for the Rams. Thankfully, yes, that's my guy. But, you look at college kickers and you just never really know. And so if you're looking at an incumbent starter who cannot hit beyond 50 yards, or a new college kicker who has this super strong leg, a lot of teams have taken their shot on a guy with a longer leg, and then hopefully you can, find some technique and get him a little more accurate in the short term. And then if you hit on this kicker, then your team is that much better for it, like Alex was saying.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people were just like asking, why did you go after Jose Boragalus, or, because he was the perceived kind of best kicker in this class. And, while, Jose was very good, I think that was kind of unrealistic that he was, going to come to the Chargers, just because, he was the best kicker available. Obviously, clearly, it looks like he wanted to stay in Florida, which is why he signed in Tampa Bay. But yeah, to me, yeah, like Steven said, you never know how kickers are going to translate. But I think you look at a guy that has that skill set, and you just look at Badgley, who, whether it's due to his injury, I mean, to credit Badgley in 2018, he did hit that 59-yard field goal, which looking back on it was like, how the hell did that happen? But I just think it's going to be a tough thing because, I don't, maybe it's because of his injury that he suffered in 2019 or whatever, but I don't think he's ever going to have that skill set or develop it. He's also older now. So yeah, I just think when you look at the guys who's going to make this team, it's very likely Kessman.
I mean, I like the idea of taking a guy with a bigger leg who can also like hit from over 50. I mean, obviously, but if the Chargers are going to be more aggressive and they are going to try to go for it when they're at 35 or the 30 or whatever, but you have to have a guy who can hit from 58 when you just can't take that chance. When the analytics say, listen, you just have to kick this damn field goal because we're at the 42 and you got to kick a 59-yarder to win this thing. I suppose you could throw it to the end zone, but the instances where you can't go for it, maybe the analytics say, just kick it. Having a guy who can hit you that game winner from that far is really important. And even if you can't hit the intermediate ones, that's okay. Because look, Harrison Butker was dreadful pretty much every game after week 2 on all sorts of situations, but he hit from like 58 3 different times over and over. Like we all know which game we're talking about. And, because of his leg, his consistency at that distance, they won that game. And that was a big game for them. And, if they had missed that, the Chargers had won. It'd been a whole different year, maybe for both teams. Well, maybe not the Chiefs, but certainly for the Chargers, I think. So I'm all for it. A guy you can get that far, let's do it. The last guy I want to talk about is Ben Deluca. I'm very jealous that you ended with a kicker, Alex, because you didn't have to find all 22. And Steven finished with a guy who had all 22. I got a DB with no all 22 who played Duke and Charlotte. Or no, he was on Charlotte, who played Duke and what's the other place? Anyway, forget it. Florida Atlantic. There it is. Those are the games that I watched. He is a safety who played 183 box safety snaps, 59 in the slot, and 119 as a free safety. Just 7 receptions and 16 targets. Low missed tackle rate. If you look the entire, I don't know how it is for Rumpf, because I think he has a missed tackle issue, but overall, like Webb, Deluca, who I'm going to talk about, Goldwyer, who I just talked about, Neiman, Webb, these guys all have missed tackle rates under 10. I don't know if that's just the thing that they went for, guys with low missed tackle rates, but they did. Again, case in point, Jamar Johnson has a 26.5 missed tackle rate. So they're looking for guys that all seem to be under like that 10 number for some reason. What I noticed immediately is he's pretty instinctual, and that's more than just in coverage. There's a couple of games, the 2 that I watched, Duke and Florida Atlantic, made 2 great tackles, one on 4th and 1, one on 3rd and 2 to get the ball carrier off the edge. A really good sense of timing, and part of that I think comes just from having a natural high football IQ, because he moves everywhere in the defense, but also as the co-captain, he lines up everyone on the defense. So I think it says a lot when you can get your own defense lined up, and you can also move to wherever you need to be all over the field. But the issue comes back to the issues we're having with the safeties that they have on the roster already. Like, maybe they're a good safety, whatever, but he's another 4.7 40 safety, which means he probably shouldn't be that free safety either. So great instincts, and maybe that could work for him as a free safety, I guess. But like for reference, Jalen Watkins ran a 4.41, and I'm not saying that like that's super athletic and everyone has to run a 4.41, but if you have Webb as a 4.7 safety and Deluca as a 4.7 safety, I'm pretty sure Gilman his RAS score wasn't that great. I can't imagine it was.
No.
So does he have a chance to make the roster based on his football IQ and being a co-captain? I believe he's led he has the college. His college's lead in, I think, like tackles and run stops. I don't know. I lost the stat. So I think he does have the best shot of the 3 guys that I talked about, but I'm not like super interested in all 3 of them because I don't know where he would fit. Like, they have Webb who can kind of move all over. I don't think Deluca is really going to like beat him out for that. So, I mean, we'll see, but I just don't really think any of my 3 guys are all that have a good shot at making the roster.
Yeah, you definitely got the short on the stick.
Alohi. I was going to say, to your point about Alohi Gilman had a 3.82 RAS score with a 4.6 40-yard dash. Nice. So, you're definitely kind of right on that.
I'm telling you, man, this safety room, it worries me a little bit. All right, so the last player here I'm going to talk about is Kyle Spalding from San Diego State, another offensive tackle. I actually think that he's going to be a guard for them. He's a little more limited athletically and in the length department than Darius Harper is. And he's a much better run blocker than Darius Harper is. So he's much more, the common phrase for offensive linemen is that, to play guard, you've got to be able to, essentially fight in a phone booth. And Kyle Spalding is that kind of player, physical at the point of attack, sets the edge really well. Actually kind of reminded me of Cole Toner, and they've got similar size and length attributes as well. So he's someone that I could see maybe pushing, for a spot on the roster, because I think he could play guard. And we've kind of seen this theme of tackle guard flexibility that the Chargers are building. So I could see a world in which, he beats out a player like Tyree St. Louis for being on the active roster, or, I can't even remember who else is on the roster in terms of guards, but, they do need some guard depth, right? Because they have Scott Quessenberry as like their center guard depth. And then they've got Tyree St. Louis and then obviously Brandon Hymas. And so I could see a world in which Spalding pushes for a roster spot. I'm not super intrigued on keeping him on the practice squad if he doesn't, like Darius Harper. I kind of want to see what they have in him because of his physical upside. But Spalding, much more limited athletically and really just a run blocker at this point. Kind of struggles with athleticism in space and doesn't really make an impact in terms of second level blocks. So, Spalding, as I said, I think as a run blocker, he can definitely have a role. But I struggle to see like the upside. Whereas with Darius Harper, I'm like, this guy is damn athletic, and if they develop him into something more than that, then I think they could have a hidden gem swing tackle kind of player on their hands. But I guess just because of the lack of depth at guard, like I could see Spalding maybe making some noise there. But then again, maybe they see him as a tackle, and if that's the case, then there's no chance he makes the roster.
That's a bummer he doesn't fit athletically. So it seems like, okay, so is Brandon Hymas, he's pretty athletic, yeah? Or not look pretty athletic, but he's a space mover. So I'm surprised to see them bring in a guy who, like everyone they brought in so far seems to be a guy who can move in space. And so for them to bring in another guy like this who's not, and just a run blocker kind of guy, that's kind of strange, no?
I think it is a little strange as well. I saw some people were really excited about it. San Diego State guy makes a lot of sense. He was honorable mention in the Mountain West in terms of all conference. So
what does that mean?
It means that he wasn't first team or second team. It means he was honorable mention in the Mountain West.
It means he didn't make first or second team
in the Mountain West. So I don't know. I struggle to see like the upside here. I think I don't know anything about him as a person, but I struggle to see really what they are seeing is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and also, it's just a missed opportunity with his last name. Should have been a basketball player.
Yeah, which is funny because Darius Harper was a basketball player. But yeah, so the three of us, I think, so Alex has Kessman as the most likely. I'll say Camp Moyer if he's a fullback. If not, I'll say Darius Harper. And Tyler, it seems like Ben Deluca is your most likely, or are you going to go with the Oklahoma State linebacker?
In terms of like position, I think Deluca has the best shot. Like, I don't know how many linebackers Staley's going to want on this roster, especially after taking Neiman. So I don't know if Ogbong Bamiga is going to make it as just a middle linebacker with no coverage ability. So I guess I'll go Deluca because they do need a safety. And like, they probably will like his intangibles. But yeah, it's not looking great for any of my guys.
I was talking with Ryan Dyrud about this the other day because obviously, he covered the Rams last year. And so I asked him, like, how many linebackers did Staley and that defense carry on the roster at the beginning of the year? And then obviously most of them got hurt, but they started the season with 5 linebackers on the roster. So that really leaves one spot up for grabs in terms of Cole Christiansen and Eamon Ogbong Bamiga. I butchered that one. Sorry. Tyler did that much better. But so it leaves one spot available for one of those two. And, I don't know how this team views Cole Christiansen. I don't know how they view Eamon, but, you know, they've got some wiggle room there. If Eamon is the better player, better athlete, better special teams guy, then I could see a world in which he makes it.
Oh, if they have another spot, and like that's what Staley did last year, then yeah, I think then never mind. I'm going to change my pick. I think it is Ogbong Bamiga who makes it.
There we
Hopefully
go.
Big Bong makes the roster.
Oh my gosh.
Amen.
All right, so that's going to do it for our undrafted free agent conversation. Next week, we're going to talk about some specific depth chart battles, which we kind of hinted at today. And then we're going to wrap this up with our interview with Chris Harry, or with my interview with Chris Harry. So make sure and listen to that. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, that is going to be in a separate video. But Tyler and Alex, any other thoughts before we wrap up today?
I just want to say that last year we talked about undrafted free agents, and I was like, oh, Braden Fajoko, that's what I think of him. And of course, he ends up, seeing NFL snaps. So what do I know, right?
That is true.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to just see how many make the team. Usually it's just kind of between 0 and 1. For the Chargers, it's kind of been 1 for a bunch of years. I'm curious to just see how Staley kind of views this roster and then how many shakeups he wants to make, because I kind of think you could have maybe the most undrafted free agents to make this team, just specifically because you have a kicker that has a great chance. And then if you add one more after that, it's kind of a bonus. But unlike last year, they had 19 undrafted free agents. This year they have 10, partially because of the roster, constructions and step ahead league and all that. So, but yeah, I'm definitely excited to see. I hope all these guys get a real chance to make the roster, because unfortunately last year, with COVID and everything, you had so many undrafted free agents that, once they had to cut from 90 to 80, right, that eliminated a lot of them. So I really hope just all these guys get a shot.
Yeah, and then kind of the last thing to mention here, they did invite KJ Costello, the quarterback from Stanford/Mississippi State, to come into rookie minicamp. So I assume that they'll invite some other players as kind of like a tryout thing. And then if they do well, maybe they do sign them as an undrafted free agent. So this list might get a little more extensive. There might be some more bodies added to that. And once they do, we will definitely cover them and their chances as well. So again, we're going to transition now to the end of our show and the interview with Chris Harry. Check it out. And thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. And as always, leave us a rating or review. Subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate all of that stuff. Like the videos. And thanks for tuning in.